The galaxy's most watched piece summit ended with a scream, a static flicker, and the sound of vaporized flesh hitting marble. 1 second, Ambassador Serena Vale stood tall on the dais, arms outstretched in a plea for unity. The next, her body lit up in white-blue light, skeleton flashing through muscle, until all that remained was the faint scent of carbon and a scorched pendant on the floor. Billions watched. Billions gasped. But 7 systems away, her daughter didn't. Kale Vale's reaction was so unearthly calm that the ship's onboard AI hesitated before speaking. Her expression didn't crack, her breath didn't change, and her eyes, green and utterly still, locked on the screen as if burning the frame into memory. The broadcast tried to cut away. Too late. The damage was done, and Kale already knew the list of names that ordered it. She stood up, walked to the other side of the dimly lit cabin, and opened a drawer sealed in biometric steel. It hissed open with the kind of noise engineers warn about in training manuals. Inside lay a single black card marked with a crimson hourglass. She touched it. The system whirred and responded with one line, Widow Protocol activated. Kale had spent most of her life pretending to be someone she wasn't. A diplomat's daughter, raised on Luna Colony with etiquette, languages, and the illusion of safety. That version of her spoke 6 dialects, wrote poetry about Terran reigns, and knew how to curtsy in 30 different cultures. But under that shell, in muscles trained by pain and reflex, lived something colder. Something bred for finality. Serena never wanted her daughter to be that thing. Which is why she trained her to be it in secret, perfecting Kale's hands into surgical weapons, her reflexes into bullet ghosts, and her memory into a map of enemies she hadn't even met yet. But Kale didn't become the best because her mother trained her. She became the best because she learned to hide the training. Now she had no reason left to hide. No reason left to hesitate. Only the list. Outside the window, stars stretched across the dark like threads waiting to be cut. Her ship was unmarked, running silent, and drifting through one of the least patrolled sectors in Congar-controlled space. The Congar Dominion, proud of their brutal efficiency, had openly taken credit for the execution. No subtext, no apology. Their supreme speaker gave a press statement: Earth must learn submission through example. And Earth? Earth, as expected, did nothing. They issued a formal protest, held a candlelight vigil, played footage of Serena's past speeches on loop. Politicians wept on camera. Celebrities posted filtered tributes. But none of them knew her. Not really. They hadn't trained in zero-gravity chokeholds at age 8. They hadn't watched Serena stitch a man's chest shut with a shoelace because no one else would survive long enough to save him. Serena Vale was no martyr. She was a loaded trigger with perfect diction. And Kale? Kale was the bullet she left behind. Her ship was already plotting a course toward the Congar border moon of Trasker, where the Dominion's mid-tier diplomats liked to hold meaningless parties full of posturing and polished wine glasses. One of them had signed the order. She remembered his voice. Remembered the way he smirked while Serena spoke. He said humans made pretty words but lacked consequences. He was about to meet one. But first, Kale had to slip in unnoticed. Not with guns or threats. No, she would arrive with flowers. The kind used in mourning ceremonies on Earth. White ashen blossoms grown only on the Terran ridge. Expensive, symbolic, and supposedly extinct. Of course, Kale had 10 crates in cryostorage. She'd cultivated them for years. Not because she liked flowers, but because no one ever scanned them for weapons. She leaned over the console and brought up a projected face. It wasn't real. Just a digital ghost of her mother stitched together from old interviews and family vids. The AI had copied Serena's voice patterns almost perfectly, down to the slight inhales she made when thinking. Kale looked at the face and for the first time in hours, let something flicker in her expression. Not sadness. Not anger. Just a blink. Then she said, very softly, almost to herself, "I know what you were doing, Mother. I get it now." The face flickered but said nothing. It didn't need to. The ship docked on a mining outpost for supply masking, and Kale stepped off with the flowers cradled in both arms. The guards at the port barely glanced at her. Just another morning human, pale-faced, hollow-eyed, and lost in her own grief. One even offered her a glass of water. She took it, smiled, and dropped a tracker in his pocket as she passed. No one saw the steel slide up her sleeve. No one noticed the way she mapped the hallways in her head, counting every corner, every blind spot. The walls were painted in propaganda murals, images of Kongar unity, strength, and progress. Kale studied them like a butcher studies cuts of meat. Back aboard her ship, the tracker came online. She traced the soldiers' movement through the base and pinpointed where the counselors would arrive for their reception tomorrow. A private chamber, press-free, scan-shielded. Perfect. She recalibrated her breathing, dropped into a low crouch, and pulled open the weapons vault. Not for the explosives. Those were too loud. Not for the knives. Those were too slow. Instead, she took a single, flat disc, no larger than a palm. It was matte black, with a blinking green pulse. The original Widow drone. One of 5 ever made. Serena had hidden it under a floorboard for 23 years. Now Kale armed it and let it hum in her hand like a sleeping god. She didn't need to kill them all. Just the right ones. The ones who watched her mother die and sipped drinks after. The ones who clapped when the feed cut. She wasn't here for chaos. She was here for closure. As the ship slipped into silent mode and prepped to descend into Trasker's atmosphere, Kale sat back, eyes locked on the descending skyline, and whispered 4 words into the still air. Let the stars witness. Because when history asked how the Kongar Dominion began to fall, it wouldn't mention the declarations or the outrage or the military delays. It would say this. The galaxy watched a diplomat die. And 7 minutes later, her daughter got up. The Trasker moon was known for its calm light tides and ceremonial marble walkways, a place where Dominion dignitaries indulged in soft power under the illusion of diplomacy. Kale stepped onto its surface with a face that could have been carved from sorrow itself. Her long black cloak fluttered gently in the wind, her arms filled with the ash-white funeral blossoms native to Terran Ridge. Every step she took seemed to echo against the polished stone with a hollow, respectful rhythm, a beat of mourning that masked the calculations behind her gaze. Nobody stopped her. Why would they? She didn't radiate danger. She radiated loss. Loss made people uncomfortable, and uncomfortable people rarely asked questions. The outer compound of the reception center was lined with glass walls and smiling statues. Inside, Kongar aides whispered to each other, stealing glances at the human woman who had arrived alone. A few even bowed their heads. One of the guards offered to carry the flowers for her, but Kale shook her head with the kind of hollow gratitude that made even the pushiest bureaucrats retreat. Her expression said everything they needed to hear. She was here to honor her mother. Just that. Nothing more. Nothing less. What they didn't see was the micro-scanner embedded in her ring, already mapping the security layout of the compound with each passing hallway. Every data stream, camera blind spot, pressure sensor, it all downloaded silently into the contacts on her eyes, feeding her real-time vulnerabilities. They had no idea. In the hall reserved for pre-ceremony refreshments, ministers and military strategists gathered with goblets of scented vapor and platters of alien delicacies. She heard their laughter before she saw their faces. The same smirks from the broadcast. The same voices, lighter now, more relaxed, like their hands were finally free of red tape. One of them, a stout Kongar official with a silver badge pinned over his left heart, made a mock toast to the execution. He lifted his cup and mimicked Serena's voice in a high, nasally tone, drawing chuckles from the others. Kale entered the room without a word, walking past them like a shadow in mourning. The room quieted slightly, just long enough for a few awkward coughs and the shuffle of shoes against marble. She placed the flowers on the center table with quiet care, as if offering them to her mother's memory in front of strangers who didn't deserve to witness it. Then she bowed her head, lips moving silently in a fabricated prayer, and turned to leave. As she walked out, one of the junior officers whispered something crass. Kale didn't flinch. She simply brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and as she did, The Widow drone's targeting matrix activated. Tiny, invisible spores from the flower petals had already begun spreading through the room's ventilation system, bonding with the ambient vapor. They weren't deadly. Not yet. But they'd leave traces on every surface they touched. A scentless, weightless mark Kale could follow later from anywhere in the sector. And when the time came, every person in that room would be locked in place with a simple gesture. She didn't need to kill them today. She needed them to feel safe. That night, Kale moved through the underbelly of the moon's city grid, tracing her steps with precision. Her cloak was gone. In its place, sleek infiltration gear adjusted to the temperature of the moon's surface and matched its muted grays. Her body moved like breath, soundless and fluid. Cameras didn't see her. Doors opened for her like they had been waiting. She scaled a drainage vent and slipped into a restricted corridor beneath the diplomatic compound. Here, the true targets resided: private suites, encrypted servers, and hidden panic rooms for Kongar elites. She didn't plan to use any of it tonight. She only came to plant the mirror. A palm-sized device disguised as a data node, designed to clone everything it touched and send the information in fragments through the black market data winds. By morning, her system would hold every message, passcode, and itinerary the Dominion thought was locked in firewalls. Every hit list. Every lie. Every name on her mother's execution order. One of the guards below stirred. Kale froze. He was half asleep in his chair, his weapon leaning lazily against the wall. She didn't need to eliminate him. She slid close, pressed a needle into the base of his neck, and whispered a single phrase into his ear. Not a threat. Not a command. Just a whisper. When he woke up, he wouldn't remember her. But he would feel fear every time someone mentioned Earth. That was enough. She vanished before his eyelids fully lifted. By morning, the compound buzzed with activity. Word had spread that the mourning daughter of Earth's fallen ambassador had arrived with rare Terran blossoms. Kale played the part beautifully, eyes glassy and voice soft. She gave a short speech in the public garden, thanking the Dominion for their gesture of hospitality, even though her voice trembled with subtle irony. Cameras hovered. Crowds recorded. The Kandar speaker himself placed a hand on her shoulder and offered condolences. Kale smiled. Just a twitch of the lips. Somewhere behind her eyes, she was already watching the playback of their servers being cracked open like crab shells. Everything was unraveling. Slowly. Beautifully. As the ceremony ended, Kale returned to her ship. Her mission was only beginning, but the first layer was done. She had entered their sanctum. Left her mark. Triggered their overconfidence. Every move now would seem like paranoia to them. The explosion didn't happen today. But one did happen on a different moon that afternoon. A Kongar convo, 3 armored vehicles off-world. All 3 were incinerated within 12 seconds by an interior implosion. No one claimed responsibility. No evidence was left. All that remained was a smear of molten steel and a single ash blossom floating in the breeze, caught by a passing drone camera. That footage went viral within minutes. The Dominion didn't make the connection. Not yet. They suspected rebels, pirates, mercenaries. Earth remained silent. And Kale? Kale sat in her cabin, calmly eating a packet of dry field rations while watching news cycles spin. Her boots were still dusty from the marble of Trasker. Her weapons were clean. She opened a drawer, pulled out a notebook with 7 symbols drawn across the front, and crossed out the first one. 6 more to go. A soft chime rang through the ship as a coded message arrived. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from allies. It was from someone watching. Someone who shouldn't exist. The message contained only 3 words. She's just beginning. The Kongar Dominion had protocols for everything, from galactic trade disputes to planetary revolts, but nothing in their vast archive covered what was now happening. Entire files were vanishing from encrypted databanks without signs of intrusion. Ministers with access to classified information were waking up with nosebleeds and flashbacks of dreams that didn't belong to them. It wasn't an attack they could fight. It was infection by silence, precision, and fear. They didn't even know the name of the enemy, only that their top-tier convoy had vanished and their data cores were being drained like marrow from bone. High Command met behind sealed titanium walls to discuss possibilities. Earth was ruled out. Earth had no known program capable of this. Mercenary work was suspected, until one general received a small package delivered directly to his private chamber. Inside was a card. Matte black, smooth, with a crimson hourglass at the center. There was no message. No threat. Just the symbol. His hands trembled as he held it, and even before he could speak, he ordered the base sealed. He had seen this mark once before, long ago, during his training in the Outer Rings. The instructor who'd warned him of it had vanished a week later. The name wasn't on file. The operation didn't officially exist. But everyone knew the whisper. Widow. Kale Vale moved through the capital planet of the Dominion like a ghost dressed in heat signatures. Her next target wasn't a building or an army. It was a memory, buried in the shadows of a luxury bathhouse suspended above the lava flats of Kongar Prime. The place was considered untouchable, protected by force fields and owned by the Inner Military Council. Generals bathed here. Strategists slept here. The water was infused with rare minerals, and the walls were lined with history, both literal and metaphorical. She didn't need an invitation. She had already bought the blueprint 6 months ago through a pirate exchange under a false name. She knew where the ducts curved, where the vents hissed just a half decibel too loud, where the motion sensors had a blind spot the size of a shadow. She walked in wearing the body of a servant, an artificial face layered over her own, posture slouched, expression blank, eyes pointed downward like a proper lesser species worker. The guards barely looked at her. One made a crude joke about Earth women and nudged another. They laughed. They didn't know she'd marked their footstep patterns 3 seconds earlier. The inner bath chamber was filled with steam and arrogance. 5 Konar officers lounged in a circle, half submerged, voices muffled through vapor. One spoke of Serena Vale with mock admiration. Another asked if the execution beam had been overkill. Kale approached with a tray of ceremonial drinks and placed it beside them. They didn't thank her. They didn't even glance up. Arrogance made them predictable. As they continued their discussion about future strikes on Terran diplomats, one lifted a glass from the tray and took a sip. Within seconds, his eyes widened. Not pain. Not poison. Just realization. His hand went limp. The glass fell and shattered, and the others stared in confusion. Kale leaned down, whispered into his ear the exact coordinates of a colony he had burned to ash 15 years ago, and watched the color drain from his face. Then she stood up and left. The guards outside still hadn't noticed anything. The officer wouldn't die. Not tonight. But within an hour, he would lock himself in his room and erase every message, every file, every trace of involvement in the strike orders. Paranoia would do more damage than any blade. Later that night, across 5 different systems, the same code began to appear. It wasn't a virus. It didn't spread through networks. It spread through fear. The branded officer's neural signature had been compromised, and his nightmares were now being broadcast to others via shared implants. The code was embedded in hallucinations, in gut instinct, in the twitch that made a soldier fire before thinking. Those who recognized the symbols broke ranks. Some defected. Others tried to report it to command, but none of their reports went through. The Dominion had no firewall for psychological warfare written in blood and memory. Kale hadn't just learned to kill. She had learned to destroy legacies. The Kongar Supreme Speaker grew desperate and issued a lockdown of all military communication. He believed this would contain the spread. It didn't. One of his advisors suggested Earth might be hiding a shadow operative. The speaker laughed. Earth was a weakened planet full of bureaucrats and broken colonies. But when his personal bodyguard handed him a sealed data chip found in his private terminal, he stopped laughing. The chip contained only one file. A single moment from the execution broadcast. Played in reverse. Frame by frame. On the final reverse frame, just before the execution beam hit Serena Vale, Her lips were moving. The speaker squinted. His advisors leaned in. When slowed to 50% speed and digitally enhanced, the final frame showed her lips forming two words. One of them was Kale. The other was the trigger word. The speaker paled. The guards around him grew tense. One of them reached for his comms device but froze mid-motion. The lights in the room flickered. All over the compound, systems glitched. The name Kale Vale lit up across hundreds of encrypted boards, as if summoned from a forgotten archive. The Dominion had executed Serena Vale for being a threat. What they hadn't realized was that Serena's death wasn't a termination. It was a signal. A pre-authorized sequence built years ago. A genetic clearance protocol only activated by her death. Kale hadn't gone rogue. She had gone active. The galaxy had watched a murder. But Serena had watched them back. Her daughter had been programmed not just to survive, but to cleanse. That night, the final truth emerged. A data leak spread across the independent systems. It showed the original Widow project, every classified detail. The training. The neurological bindings. The simulations. Every failed operative. Every failed clone. And at the bottom of the file, one name marked as the sole success. Kale Vale. Survivability Index, 100%. Psychological kill ratio, unrestricted. The Dominion scrambled to discredit the leak. But it was too late. Other factions began whispering. Other empires paused their negotiations with the Congar. For the first time in 100 years, the Dominion felt pressure from within. It wasn't war. It was something more terrifying. It was the feeling that someone was behind the curtain, pulling threads they hadn't noticed. And the worst part was that she wasn't doing it for revenge. Not anymore. She was doing it because the galaxy needed to be reminded what silence before execution actually meant. Kale stood alone at the edge of a derelict orbital station, watching Dominion broadcasts from 100 different feeds. They were calling her a terrorist now. A shadow. A myth. She didn't respond. She didn't correct them. She opened her notebook and scratched out the second symbol. 5 remained. Each one a name. Each one now afraid to close their eyes. She smiled, then closed the notebook and walked away, vanishing once more into the shadows of a war they never saw coming. The fortress planet of Caldrith was where the Dominion's elite gathered when fear began to creep through the cracks of their power. Floating above a molten core and guarded by fleets that never slept, it was their last resort. A vault in the void where no transmission could leak, no assassin could enter, no rebellion could touch them. They called it the Unbreakable Sanctum. But Kale Vale had already mapped its ventilation shafts a year before her mother died. Now she stood in orbit just beyond the detection grid, her ship running silent and coated in anti-sensor static so fine it could blend with comet trails. She wasn't interested in brute force. She was interested in symbols, in ritual, and tearing down the illusion that made Caldrith seem safe. Because once they started to doubt their own sanctuary, the rest of the galaxy would know they were already bleeding. Inside the compound, the remaining council members gathered for what they called a containment summit. Their robes shimmered with rank, their voices lowered to whispers, and their eyes twitched toward shadows that had never bothered them before. One demanded immediate retaliation against Earth. Another argued for evacuation and deep space exile. But the supreme strategist silenced them with a raised hand. He explained calmly that the threat was one woman. One agent. One myth wrapped in fear. What they needed was to find her and end her. That was all. Simple. Efficient. The speaker agreed, and the room exhaled. Until the lights flickered. It lasted only half a second, but the silence afterward stretched like a rope across a chasm. A junior aide shifted uncomfortably. A guard reached for his sidearm and then paused. The power restored instantly. But now, no one spoke. Because on the table between them, there was a single flower. White, curled at the edge, unmistakably from the Terran ridge. And no one had seen it placed there. The council stood in panic. Orders were shouted. The room scanned. No breach. No heat signatures. No entry logs. And yet, the flower remained. Fresh. Fragrant. Real. It wasn't a threat. It was worse. It was proof that Cale Vale had been in the room, standing among them, watching them decide what to do about her. And she had left a message without saying a word. Cale had entered hours earlier, not through the front, but through the delivery system for the compound's recycled water. The pipes had a maintenance hatch 20 kilometers from the main structure, meant only for droids. She wasn't a droid. But she moved like one. Precise, silent, cold. She passed bioscans by masking her pulse, matched the temperature of the pipes, and even slowed her breathing to mimic waste vent patterns. When she emerged inside the utility corridor beneath the summit room, she didn't need weapons. She only needed presence. A flicker in their mind. A handprint on their conscience. When she placed the flower, she could hear them arguing above. She didn't hate them. She didn't even rage. She simply existed where they thought she couldn't. That was enough. After the panic settled, the speaker declared a state of absolute lockdown. The fortress shifted into siege mode. No transmissions. No traffic. No entry or exit without direct retinal authorization. But that didn't stop the leak. Within hours, a video surfaced across neutral systems. Footage from inside the summit room. The flower. The panic. The fear in the eyes of men who once ruled with fire. It wasn't just leaked. It was edited with slow zooms, frame highlights, and ambient sound design. The title of the video was 4 words. She left this here. Millions watched it. Then billions. The Dominion's top leadership had been infiltrated, unarmed and unprepared, by a daughter of the woman they murdered on stage. The galaxy watched their invincibility collapse in high definition. Cale didn't flee. She lingered. She stalked their outer patrols, left false heat trails, triggered decoys to test response times. She mapped how long it took for drones to scramble, how the alarms echoed through tunnels, how the guards rotated every 90 seconds instead of 60. It was methodical. Clinical. Like watching a surgeon cut into a dying thing not to heal it, but to understand how it broke. She wasn't hunting them anymore. She was studying them. Because the final strike couldn't be rushed. It had to be poetry. One evening, 3 days after the lockdown, Cale entered the inner courtyard during a false twilight simulation the Dominion used to mimic planetary calm. She wore her mother's diplomatic robe. The guards saw her but didn't fire. Not because they hesitated. Because their weapons didn't work. She had jammed the kinetic frequencies using tech pulled from Dominion archives themselves, codes they assumed were buried. She walked past them like a ghost from a war they hadn't realized they lost. Into the courtyard. Through the open archways. Up the white steps. Straight into the heart of their sacred chamber. The remaining council stood frozen. They had practiced what they would say. They had rehearsed pleas, demands, threats. But now, faced with her in silence, they said nothing. Cale stood before them, eyes scanning, face unreadable, and then she spoke. Only one sentence. This is where you beg. The speaker stepped forward, trembling, voice dry, but Cale held up her hand. She didn't want apologies. She didn't want tears. She wanted them to know it was already over. They lunged for escape pods. None responded. The docking clamps had been disabled days earlier. Their personal shuttles? Already destroyed. Their emergency capsules rerouted to a dead planet where the atmosphere peeled skin from bone. All of this had been done not in hours, but in weeks. Slowly. Quietly. Because she had never left the game board. She had simply let them play themselves into checkmate. She didn't kill them. Not all. She picked one. The youngest. The least corrupt. The one who always looked nervous during council votes. She handed him a data chip and Serena's necklace. She said nothing more. He would be the messenger. The one who would spread the final truth not through orders, but through memory. A living echo of their failure. A reminder that Earth had asked for peace, and the Congar Dominion had answered with death. And so death had come, not through armies, but through legacy. Kale left as quietly as she had arrived. The fortress fell into emergency silence. The survivor was released with no guards. No escort. No weapons. Just guilt and memory. Somewhere deep within the compound, smoke drifted from the walls, not from fire, but from systems overloaded by the presence of a single woman who had walked where no one was supposed to reach. Kale's ship rose through the atmosphere without being chased. The Dominion no longer had the will. They would tell stories, create defenses, rewrite manuals. But none of it would matter. Because the worst had already happened. Their illusion had shattered. Their stronghold had been touched. The galaxy would never fear them the same way again. Kale sat in silence as the stars turned above her. She opened her notebook and crossed out another name. 4 more. Then the notebook would burn. And the name Kale Vale would be spoken only in whispers by those who knew how it all ended. Across the outer systems, the Kongar Dominion's silence began to speak louder than its commands ever had. Colonies that once bowed with practiced obedience now paused. Trade partners delayed shipments. Rebel clusters that had long whispered in the dark found sudden courage, sensing the shift in power. The Dominion's top brass had vanished from public view. There were no press conferences, no retaliatory threats, no speeches of control. Just a vague promise of investigation and a list of scapegoats who were mysteriously never seen again. The galaxy knew better. The galaxy had seen the footage. A woman in a diplomatic robe had walked through their most secure compound and left unharmed. Every system that ever feared the Dominion now stared at that moment, frozen on screens and replayed through bars, hideouts, bunkers, and underground networks. The tyrants weren't untouchable. They were already bleeding. And no army had done it. Just a single daughter with her mother's eyes. Kale moved through a neutral corridor station 2 weeks after the Culberth breach, wearing a hooded cloak and blending among refugees, smugglers, and ex-mercenaries pretending to be miners. No one recognized her. Or if they did, no one was foolish enough to admit it. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. She had already marked the final names in her notebook. 3 ministers, 1 strategist, and the overseer of Sector 4. Each one had helped plan Serena Vale's execution. Some had signed the order with a flourish. Others had stood by and smiled while it happened. It didn't matter how loud or quiet their roles had been. The ink on her mother's death was soaked in their fingerprints. And now they would vanish, one by one, as if history had decided they didn't belong anymore. The first 2 were easy. Kale didn't need to touch them. She leaked a data fragment that suggested they were embezzling Kongar military funds to trade with outlawed alien guilds. The Dominion's internal purge units did the rest. They were gone before sunrise, dragged into black transports and erased from all official records. The strategist proved harder. He lived aboard a moving cruiser surrounded by 12 personal guards and a neuroshielded room that blocked every form of digital intrusion. Kale entered not through the front, but as a janitorial AI. She uploaded her consciousness into a disposable bot frame, cleaned his floors for 2 days, mapped his habits, and then triggered a fake coolant spill. When the alarm sounded, she retracted from the frame, rebooted in another droid, and sliced the ship's gravity for exactly 8 seconds. When it restored, the strategist's personal gravity field had inverted. He spent his final moments folded against the ceiling, alone, floating upside down in a room that no longer recognized him as part of its world. Kale didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She marked the name. 1 left. The overseer of Sector 4 had disappeared the night of Serena's execution. He had anticipated a backlash. Had gone dark, retreated into deep space, his location scrambled through 5 proxy worlds and relay satellites. For a while, even Kale couldn't find him. But she wasn't alone. Someone else had been watching. Someone who had remained in the background since the beginning. A signal blinked into her ship's system one morning, untraceable and encrypted with a pattern only 2 people in the galaxy would recognize. It was her mother's final code. Kale stared at the message for several minutes before opening it. It contained coordinates. 1 word. Home. She rerouted her ship without hesitation. The coordinates didn't lead to Earth or any known colony. It was a redacted zone listed as uninhabitable due to radiation storms. But Kale knew better. Serena had always told her that home wasn't where you were born. It was where you left your weapons outside the door. The planet was quiet. Cold. No cities, no patrols. Just rocks, wind, and a small underground shelter built into the cliffs. When Kale entered, the lights turned on by themselves. The air smelled of salt and steel. In the corner sat a stasis pod. And inside it was Serena Vale. Alive. The shock didn't show on Kale's face. Her eyes barely widened. But her hand trembled slightly as she approached. The pod's interface blinked green. Vital signs steady. Stasis hold successful. A nearby console displayed the details. Serena had faked her own death. The execution had been a holographic overlay, projected just milliseconds before the real beam would have struck. A failsafe she had activated only once it became clear that her diplomatic mission had turned into a trap. The program had automatically uploaded Kale's full widow clearance, armed every protocol, and rerouted all of Serena's hidden resources to her daughter. Serena hadn't died. She had disappeared to let Kale become what she needed to be. Kale stood there, unmoving. She didn't open the pod. Not yet. Instead, she sat beside it, pulled out her notebook, and stared at the final name. The Overseer had run. Hidden. But Serena had always known where he would go. He had built this place with her, back before alliances turned to blood. Back when peace had still seemed possible. He had betrayed her. And in return, she had turned his sanctuary into bait. Kale reached for her earpiece, activated a short-range scan, and waited. Minutes passed. Then a silent ping. A signal. Weak, but familiar. A ship. Landing just over the ridge. She didn't move to stop him. She didn't prepare a weapon. She simply stood at the entrance, hands at her sides, watching as the Overseer descended, unaware that the pod behind her still held the woman he thought he had erased from history. When he reached the edge of the cliff, Kale tilted her head and asked him if he'd come to bury what was left. He tried to talk. To explain. To lie. But Kale cut him off with a single question. Do you remember what she said before you killed her? He hesitated. He didn't. Kale stepped aside and revealed the pod. He fell to his knees, either in shock or weakness, she couldn't tell. She let the moment sit, heavy and cold, like snow that never melts. Then she stepped forward, handed him a data chip, and told him to run. Not to escape. But to live long enough for the galaxy to know his face, to know what he did, to see his cowardice in every feed and every archive for the rest of time. There would be no clean death for him. Only memory. Only shame. Kale walked back to the pod and sat beside her mother. She didn't activate the release sequence. She didn't need to. Serena's plan had worked. The Dominion was broken, not by bullets, but by proof. The galaxy didn't fear the widow anymore. It feared the truth. That empires can fall to whispers. That the most dangerous weapon isn't strength, but silence. The pod lights dimmed. The stars blinked overhead. And Kale Vale, daughter of the galaxy's last real diplomat, closed her notebook for the final time. No names left. No vengeance unsatisfied. Just silence. And peace. The kind her mother had always believed in. The kind Kale had made real.